Coming up, with rumors starting to circulate that Jonathan Kuminga could be on the precipice of frustration with the Golden State Warriors, we break down why he is a targetable player for the Brooklyn Nets and why the mold, the model of player, is exactly the sweet spot where the Nets can hope to take a big leap forward.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports projections. From DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and the sadly eliminated New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms and let you know that you can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. And Doug, maybe, just maybe, there's a guarantee that the Brooklyn Nets can start to shred into some of these interesting waters around players, as we'll discuss first and foremost, like a Jonathan Kuminga. You unearthed, I think, this premise for the Brooklyn Nets. So break down why a player like him could be so attractive.
Yeah, look, it came out over the weekend. It was originally in a Shams retweeted an Anthony Slater piece who covers the Warriors for The Athletic, and then Evan Siddery got in on it. But they were talking about just Kuminga as the possibility that Kuminga, who obviously was drafted a few years ago by the Golden State Warriors, that he is looking for an expanded role and kind of has become unhappy with his non-role in Golden State. And that there's a chance that he hits the market. And there's a lot of different reasons why it could be the case. Look, there's other reasons why I couldn't, but at the time, I gotta pat myself on the back here, is one of the first people, that maybe just the first of the Nets world to jump on this, and then it kind of made the rounds. But was that this is just the exact kind of guy that where the Nets are right now that they should be targeting this. And we're going to give tons of examples of why this should be the case for the Nets and why this specific kind of archetypal guy makes sense. But I'll call them post-hype sleeper kind of guys, that the Nets should be sort of not all in on this type of player, but very aggressive in trying to get this type of player. Because I think where they are in their build, this guy kind of makes sense. And I would love to see it happen. We'll give other examples too, but when you hear about Kuminga, we'll talk a little about what happened to him this season. But when you hear about a guy like Kuminga, it would what the Nets already sort of have together on the team. Do you feel this is the kind of dude that makes sense for the Nets to want to target?
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, just from a skill set standpoint, from a trajectory, and you said discussing kind of how we got a little bit of another bigger sample size due to injuries for the Golden State Warriors this season, of course. And by the way, 2 years under his belt, and still 20 years old and 200 plus days. So still also in the sweet spot when it comes to the age range of having a guy that, assuming he takes those next steps forward, you can sign him to the next contract and the contract after that, right? And have a real kind of piece here that maybe bridges the gap, no pun intended, between Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and then the next wave. Because guess who else is still young on this team? Nicholas Claxton, right? So you can kind of do a both and here. I will say, I don't want to pour, because I want to get your continued conversation around what happened this season. When you initially brought this up to me and doing it on the show, the first thing I ran to was well, where's this contract and why is this a possibility? The role for Golden State and wanting to have an expanded role, that makes all the sense in the world if you're Kuminga. But when you go over and look at the fact that Jonathan Kuminga had the 23-24 club option exercised on him for just north of $6 million as the base salary on that, and then has another club option at 22 years old and 24-25 for 7.6. While we know that the Golden State Warriors are coming up to a very interesting decision-making process around a lot of their older players, the other thing I think we know about Golden State is they're pretty smart. They tend to do things, fundamentally sound as far as NBA franchises go. And I think I have a hard time looking at this player, getting excited for all the reasons we bring up, and then going, and the Golden State Warriors are going to be open to this, even if it does become maybe just a push come to shove around dollars. I get that piece of it. But I think I'd be more excited if it was a walk year coming up for him here, or the money was a little bit larger where the Golden State Warriors are still going to want to bring back a Draymond Green beyond this next season, et cetera.
Yeah, so I totally get it. Like the Warriors are a smart team. They are in some kind of luxury cap hell here. I like more than like most teams could ever even imagine, to the point where, I'll push back on the would they do it? They literally just did it with the #1 overall pick in James Wiseman less than 6 months ago, where they unloaded him kind of just about money. Because he couldn't find a role and he wasn't really fitting their scheme and like whatever. But it was going to cost them like 4x whatever he was getting paid just on the salary cap hit. So they are in a money problem area here. I don't know if Kuminga fits exactly. I mean, Kuminga did play this season, so I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison, but we do have an example of them cutting their losses with, again, the #1 overall pick in Wiseman. And the other thing you can say sorry. He was the second overall pick to Edwards. Edwards was first. It was Edwards, Wiseman, LaMelo. So we'll keep it in there, and I'll do better next time. But like top 2 pick, whatever. Yeah. With Kuminga, it's interesting. Like, I'm with you. Like, most teams wouldn't do this. The Warriors are in a very tricky situation with their money and wanting to keep their guys together. Let's just entertain the idea where it does become, where it gets put on the table, right? Like where they are in penny pinching territory. They have to unload some of this young core that was supposed to be him. That was supposed to be it. It was like Wiseman, Moody, and Kuminga, where they kind of spike these high lottery picks in between years of their franchise. The reason the Nets should be like thinking about guys like this is because the dream scenario for the Nets is Kuminga actually represents it, which is he was at one point a very highly touted prospect. He's #7 overall pick in the draft. If the draft had been a year before, he would have gone higher. Like if he had been draft eligible for the season before, I think he would have been like a top 3 pick. He slipped a little bit because of the G League stuff that year, but didn't slip far. Like he slipped to 7th, I think, overall, right? Yeah. He slipped to 7th that season behind Gideon in front of Franz Wagner. Like, but then the realization around Kuminga is like, okay, so you have this post-type guy. You have this guy who at one point was very highly touted. And kind of his main problem is he just hasn't really gotten to play, right? Like, it's not, and now you might say, well, it's chicken or the egg. Is he not getting to play because he's not good enough? Or is he not getting to play because like this is just kind of the wrong team for this guy to be playing on, right? And like 29 other teams would have found a way to get this guy way more minutes at this point. Like the Nets are in a situation now where this has to be the exact guy. Like the ratables are all there. He tests out well as like as a sort of darling in the draft at one point. So there's like pedigree, right? And you look at the situation and you say to yourself, well, what didn't happen? We just didn't like get to play enough. And I'll give other examples of guys like this later. Like the role just wasn't there. But does that make sense what I'm saying? Like why? Like this is like just the exact guy. I'd give a pick or something like to do it because I think that like there's enough meat on the bone to like really see some upside here.
Oh, 100%. Now, and that was the other question is like, what are you willing to give up to acquire him potentially, right? And it's funny because the uniqueness around Kuminga and specifically the Golden State Warriors, as you said, well, it's because they ran so bad on injury luck that normally a team of that caliber with those expectations and those goals season over season championships are not in a position to draft a player this high, which also means that they're a team that is not inspired or feeling compelled to play a young player, right? Young guys play max minutes when they're on teams that have everything to gain by playing the young stars. Maybe not the Brooklyn Nets when it comes to Cam Thomas, but that's neither here nor there, right? So I think that that's a big factor here. And you talk about this past season, if you want to dream on what could be possible, it spikes around when Wiggins leaves for personal reasons. He's away from the team for a while. So Jonathan Kuminga's numbers like get skewed in terms of the almost 21 minutes per game because he played more for a stretch and then immediately gets put right back into the back end, not getting utilized enough rotation of Steve Kerr. But you saw all the incremental progress that you want, specifically on the three-point shooting. He goes from 33 on 2 points attempt per game, dials it up to 37, right? So just seeing that across the board, free throw percentage isn't good enough. But I think to your point, if you can lean on the fact that he was universally agreed to be a talent worthy of a top 10 draft pick, it means that the potential is still in there. And not unlike other guys we're going to talk about in a second here, there is the world where if he just plays 30 plus minutes a game, all of a sudden that next level gets unlocked, something that you may not see over the next 2 seasons if he stays with Golden State.
All right, we're gonna break down some more of the guys that kind of like fall into this bucket of examples of why the Nets should be able to target or want to really target guys like this, regardless of fit. We'll get into that in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Look, buying tickets these days should not be stressful. You're going to something fun. You want to go to it. You want to get the tickets. You want to get the best price. You want to know where you're sitting. And you don't really want to just be in a full competition mode. That's why you have to go check out the Game Time app. It's got everything you want in the area. If you go to gametime.co right now or on the app, Padres Yankees coming up here later this week. They're already out there with Jets Giants for way out in October. They got there up on Game Time. U.S. Open tickets right around CONCACAF Gold Cup. I mean, it's all there for you over on Game Time. You're going to be able to see the seats that you're going to sit in. You're not going to have to just do all this like planning months in advance. You know you're going to have the tickets. You know you're going to have the right deals. You can buy the tickets in a matter of seconds, just 2 taps and you're all set. Sent directly to your phone, so you're not digging through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Okay, so before we expand into the other players and other examples of this, both past and maybe guys that could be on the fringe coming up here around the NBA potentially, you mentioned there about being willing to give up, say, a pick for it. Like, what are you willing to do to get Kuminga? Because that is the unique position the Nets are in, as we know, with all the draft capital that they've acquired through the Kyrie and through the Kevin Durant trades, to say, we actually could throw a little something out here for you and see if you bite on it, knowing that it actually doesn't damage us and being able to continue to add additional young talent.
Like this year's pick, I don't know, like one of those other future, I don't think the Warriors would do that, but if they were looking to like restart some of their young guy clock and just like reset some of the money, like this year's pick would be a no brainer. I don't think that'd probably be enough for Golden State, but I don't know. It's a first round pick. It's not like total end of the lot. It's not the total end of the first round. That would be an obvious. That'd be an obvious thing for me. I think it's not enough, but that would be in a millisecond.
Yeah, well, there's been some scenarios too that have been talked about because I did start to. Here's the way it works, folks. Just a little peek behind the curtain of the show. Doug says the possibility of Nets targeting a young player. Adam goes to trade machines. He starts getting excited. He starts dreaming on it. But one of the things I thought about was because a lot of the articles that are being discussed right now, when you look at the Brooklyn Nets, is what would Sean Marks prefer to do? And I did that whole episode last week discussing the past years and how he's danced around the board a little bit, tried to push off picks for future drafts. If the Nets come up at 21 and they get a guy that they like there, calling Golden State and saying, hey, 22nd pick, do you like somebody here? Do you want this? And then I go immediately back into my roster and I look at a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith and I say, hey, veteran talented player, not a terrible cap hit, controlled by the team. I throw him into the mix, who once upon a time was worth 2 first-round draft picks. We don't know if it's still the same, but if those two things together get me a younger prospect, a guy that I like the upside of, I think that's a move you can make as Sean Marks as the Nets and not feel like you actually really cost yourself too much, right? Like there's a real value there. Like he comes in and starts playing, we know, immediately for the Brooklyn Nets. And I think you have to consider that, getting younger and getting more upside on your players.
Yeah, conceptually I like it. I don't think DFS, I was thinking about this more with Dorian Finney-Smith. I don't think he fits like Golden State's like kind of personnel. So on a high level, I agree with you. Like I would love to get younger off him immediately. I'm not sure if it can happen, but yeah, like that would be a no brainer for me. Like those things like that, getting younger with higher upside, I do that every time. And I would give up picks. I give up some of these picks. Again, this is like we've seen time and time again. It doesn't happen all the time, but we've seen many times where just like it wasn't necessarily the player, it was the fit, right? It was like this, it just wasn't really happening for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it's very difficult to tell. Is it the player's fault that it's like sort of not realizing the potential, or is it the system and the coach and the timing and the pressure? And there's like weird other situation. Golden State's a tough place to play. The system's super tough. Like it's unlike most other systems. You have to be fully bought into it. You're not going to really ever shoot. Like there's a lot of problems with situations that like it can make it really tough. And I just think that like and the Nets have to get younger and more athletic. That has to be the goal. Like athleticism and youth has to be like, and if it hasn't looked amazing on the court all the time, that's okay. And if we have another thing I heard a lot too is, oh, we have a lot of wings. Who cares? Who cares? Oh, it doesn't like fit. We need this and this and this. The Nets don't need anything except for youth and athleticism so they can begin to rebuild the roster. Like, yeah, would it be nice to have a slightly better point guard situation? Yeah, definitely. Would you like to have like someone that's like a clear four or like a stretch four stretch? Yeah, of course. But that's like should not be what the no, of course, never. Oh, they say plays the same position as some other guy you like. Get out of here with that. Like, get out of here. With that. I'm sick of hearing that. From people, it makes no sense.
And it is funny too because you bring up that point because, and I think this does matter if you want to have the argument of we have a lot of wings or what do we think we can do in the coming year or two with the players we currently have, and for the most part, fans I think have a realistic kind of outlook on where this team can go. But by the way, say you thought. And this isn't the case, but say you thought by Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, Cam Thomas, name the guys you want to throw in, a couple of picks. Say that you think that by bringing Kuminga and any young player and going through growing pains was going to take you from being in the playoffs and losing in the first round, being in the play-in game or et cetera, right? If you think it's going to marginally lower your ceiling over the next 1 or 2 seasons, that is 1,000 times worth it on the thought that 3 or 4 years from now, we all of a sudden are in the prime position, as we know, to take all that 28, 27, 20, 29 draft capital and then go maybe land a big superstar and add him into the well-established young core. And the one thing the Nets can't afford to do, as I continue to make a stronger and stronger case for Jonathan Kuminga for the Brooklyn Nets, is that they can't afford to turn around 2 years from now with a 31-year-old DFS, with a 32-year-old Royce O'Neal, right? Like, and we know Joe Harris won't be here, Curry won't be here, but like, you can't turn around. I mean, looking at like the shells of things with Mikal Bridges getting closer to 30, Cam Johnson at 30, and then having Nicholas Claxton at 25. Like we've done this exercise before on the podcast. Look at the roster right now. Yes, there is talent there, and we saw it play out over the back end of the season, but it's not talent that's going to propel you forward beyond the next couple of seasons. So you have to be forward thinking about it. And I think that really is the point that you're speaking to with a guy like Kuminga. It's like, the upside is there. You got 10 years to figure out how high his ceiling could be potentially.
Yeah, look, I'd actually be a little annoyed if some of these older guys were even on the roster to start next year. I would feel like actually it was like sort of like a mini failing of like what the real path here is. Like if some of these guys are still kicking around, and it's nothing about them necessarily. Like the Royce O'Neals and the Dorian Finney-Smiths, and like forget Curry because he's not coming back, and Harris you probably can't trade the contract. But like it would be a real failing if like they went into next season just sort of like rolling the balls out and running it back like with this group, because and I don't think they will, but like if it was like that type of player, because I'll give you some more examples. Let's go to, because we're going to close this out. Like I'll give you some more examples of like other guys they can try to get to. Say it and then we'll take a quick break.
Yeah, no, and it is because, to your point, whatever becomes of Jonathan Kuminga or the other names that we'll bring up here in a moment, you have to take the chances on what could be versus what you currently have, because you know what all of the veterans on your team are. You don't know what Jonathan Kuminga could be, and we'll break down some additional possibilities coming up here in a second.
Before we get to that, I can tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. And I'm going to throw another thing on there. They say it's made easy. I'm going to say super easy. Daily, all you're doing at Prize Picks, you're not wrestling with salary caps. You're not going up against sharks in the water. It's just you putting in entries, going more or less on the player projections. That's it. If you're doing it for the NBA, as we roll through the Western and Eastern Conference finals and then into the finals, all you're doing is you're putting 2 to 6 players together. You're going to go more or less on points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, and you can win up to 25 times your money on every entry. There's a $1 million daily Superflex promotion for it happening at Prize Picks right now. You get in those entries. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern is going to be randomly selected. Whoever gets that entry is going to get a chance at $1 million. If you get 6 correct picks, $1 million, 5 correct, 80,000, 4 correct, 16,000. Mouth-watering numbers right there. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport you can watch: NBA, NFL when it comes back, MLB rolling through the season, PGA. We got some majors coming up. You download the Prize Picks app and go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. Got to use that promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
All right, so I want to dial up these other names and other possibilities. But I'll be honest with you, it's funny coming out of the season, and this is what happens when Doug and I start to ruminate on different ideas like this. I understood why you kept some of the veterans around down the stretch with Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson. Now, fast forward, you just said it there in the last segment, like, well, now you kind of can't have all these dudes on the roster next year because even the sacrifice of like, say, instead of going 20 and 15 to start the season or whatever, you go 15 and 20, flip it. Fine. Like, totally worth it because the growing pains are going to be worth it. What are the other guys though? Because when we were talking before we started, it wasn't a 1-to-1, but I did have I had a comical thought about a specific NBA team, but I'll get there if we have time.
All right, look, just real quick, a few examples of guys like this has worked out with recently. Like Rui Hachimura just went for a bucket load of second-round picks and is like actually playing meaningful minutes for the Lakers now. Same kind of thing, like big attributes, pretty athletic, doesn't do certain things well, but clearly in the right sort of system, it can kind of work, right? The Nets have the guy here on. It's not exactly right, but Mikal Bridges, like underutilized in the last stop, completely utilized here. And you're like, oh, we got a borderline superstar in their hands. So, there's different versions of this. You said off the air, which is a good one, like Andrew Wiggins. It's like, that's a little different because it was like overpaid and the contract was weird, but then it was like, the second most important or third most important after Draymond, like Warrior, right? Like there are examples of these guys.
Oh, yeah, and they get uncovered in a lot of different ways. I mean, listen, D'Angelo Russell, you can make the case that he got jettisoned too quickly and then reclaims himself a little bit in Brooklyn and goes on to have a more productive career. And the irony, I'm using almost him as the tie-in here between he ends up with the Minnesota Timberwolves where things just don't work out and then goes and becomes a key contributor for the LA Lakers in their deep playoff run. Andrew Wiggins, who couldn't seem to find himself with the Minnesota Timberwolves, gets shipped out, overpaid, great, becomes a very key piece in a well-run organization in their championship runs. There's something here, I think, when we talk about Karl Anthony Towns. He may just be a perennial first ballot Hall of Famer trapped inside of the Minnesota Timberwolves body. We'll see how it unfolds, but there are examples like that. And the biggest factor, and you and I have talked about this when it comes to draft classes, right? I love to dream on even second-round picks. We know Nicholas Claxton was. It's few and far between, even late first-round picks that really pan out to be key contributors. And that's the X factor here, is that all of these guys sit at the top with Kuminga, like they have a pedigree that suggested they could have been one of the better players in the league. And for whatever number of reasons, it hasn't panned out. And it's for some other team to maybe capitalize on, especially if you're in the Golden State Warriors situation, cap restraints, or maybe a guy, injuries are a big factor too. I'm like trying to scratch my head around guys that like weren't as productive as they could have been. We've talked about him in previous episodes. Like, Zion may end up becoming that guy, even though we've gotten the sniff of it. You may not end up seeing what he truly is until he ends up somewhere else. And he has big money, and I get that. But it is interesting, man. Like it has me recalibrating what I think the Nets should and could accomplish this offseason to really take this team and go from saying, well, our window is 2 to 3 years and reevaluate when those big picks come in. Well, now it could be like, let's start a different version of a rebuild, right? Like, I think that's what's changing my mind here. It's like, yes, we can get a lot younger around a couple of key players that we really like.
Yeah. So like another example of a guy like this, and by the way, sometimes like you gave like the superstar examples of it, which is always going to sound a little bit better, like for sure, because like sometimes these names aren't going to be like super fun to hear about, right? Because it's like, but there's a reason why, like the stock has dropped, right? And the situation is great. I'll give you a couple. Like one, Isaac Okoro, right? Like so you look at the situation in Cleveland. All right. He was like, they couldn't really play him because there was like some like shooting issues. He was a fifth overall pick. It was a weak draft. It was the Edwards draft. And like behind him, it wasn't like anyone made huge mistakes after him. But 22 years old, we know the Cavs could probably desperately use a 3-and-D wing. Like they didn't really have it. Like the Nets have a couple of these guys that could like actually fit in. They clearly didn't want to play Okoro tons of minutes. Okoro did hit that dagger buzzer beater against the Nets, and like the only three-pointer he hit all year was against the Nets at the buzzer. But like that's a guy I'm like, okay, look, does it look great? Like, are you going to look at the situation in Cleveland and think to yourself, oh, we're going to get that guy? It's like, that cannot be how we're thinking. We cannot be thinking like that. It's like at some point he went high in the draft for a reason. It hasn't totally worked out. There's definitely flaws in the game. It might not work out now, right? but like these kind of players, looking at these kind of guys, like Kobe White is sort of like this in Chicago, right? It's like guys like I probably like Okoro better than Kobe White, but like situations like, hey, you know who's hard to play with? Donovan Mitchell and when he takes a million shots, right?
Right.
Who's hard to play with, like Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan when they take all the shots, right? Like sometimes you just don't get a sense of what these guys can be when you play and you're paired with high usage guys. Again, to use the Mikal Bridges example, Chris Paul and runs pick and roll with DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker takes all the rest of the shots. There's nothing left over, right? So you have to look at these situations and be like, hey, have we actually gotten a full example of what these guys can be like? No. Kobe White went 7th overall in the draft at one point, 2 behind Garland. You know what I mean? Jarrett Culver was another guy like this, but he's out of the league. Anyway, my point is,
that's the other way to go.
It doesn't always work out. Like Cam Reddish, everyone thought they were going to turn Cam Reddish into something, and he's on his like 4th team now, and he stinks. So it doesn't always work out for sure. But like these kind of guys, go and look at the situation. The better way to look at these situations, this will be the last thing I say. The better way to look at some of these situations would not be like what has happened for them, but rather what might have stopped a better thing from happening for them, right? Yeah. Like, go look at the teams they were on, who they were playing with, the opportunity they have or didn't have. Go look at those. Is like, can you tell yourself a story about a few reasons like this might not have worked out? If you can, and at one point those guys have pedigree, the Nets should target those guys.
And in those situations, again, the price point, right? When the price point is correct, it becomes a fairly low cost flyer. And the other factor we didn't even really talk about here is just being able to bring the money down for the Brooklyn Nets, right? Finding ways to decrease and stay well underneath the luxury tax threshold and clean some things up. We know you got to wait and dream on what Ben Simmons is or is not going to be or come back healthy, et cetera. But there are things that you can do to be proactive. And when you talk about some of these young players around the league, everyone to a man always says 2 things. One, that the best way to develop a young player is to get minutes. That's the way that they get it, getting minutes at the NBA level. And when it comes to Kuminga, maybe the best thing that you can say is that he is right now, after 2 seasons in the league and a bit of frustration, he's voicing, hey, I want to be out there playing more. I still think that my pedigree is top 10 NBA draft talent. I need to be in a position where I can do that.
Yeah, and it just is. Like, if you watch them play, it's definitely there. It didn't all click. Yeah. It didn't all click, but it's there. And I actually think the Golden State will probably see that too. But this was a trampoline move into like getting into talking about these kind of players, right? Yep. So like that's the whole thing is like gotta think a little outside the box. It's not always gonna look easy. All right, we're gonna get out of here. Much appreciate everyone that's rolling with us through the off season here. We got draft stuff. I know we teased this a few times. We definitely are coming here. Draft stuff is coming up. Locked On's running some draft lottery stuff. We're gonna be joining in on that. We're gonna be locking in on some of the guys that are projected to go in the Nets range. There's some pretty interesting dudes out there. The Nets do have a lot of decisions to make around the picks that they have this season. So it's going to be an interesting, definitely an interesting draft. We're going to be getting to that soon. Much appreciated. Make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Nets on YouTube.
We knew exactly who we were and where we were going. It was grand. That is Gordy LaChance.
Oh, one of the all-time. Is that Muddy Dunks? Wait, is that that?
That's Gordon Bombay, but Gordy LaChance.
Gordy LaChance, Stand By Me, right? Yeah, Stand By Me. Just talking about it the other day. I know this was not the perfect way to close the show here, but my kid is finally old enough to see this movie, which was one of my all-time favorites. Which is why I'm embarrassed because I was waiting for the sports thing there, and I was like, Stand By Me, but I don't think he would do Stand By Me.
Love it.
As an absolute sucker for the coming of age stuff, Stand By Me, absolute classic. Gordy LaChance, one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.